The Penn State Nittany Lions take on the Notre Dame Fighting Irish January 9th, a Thursday night for a college football playoff semifinal game. Thursday night, January 9th at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time is when Penn State and Notre Dame, James Franklin and Marcus Freeman, face off for a shot to play for a national championship. Penn State and Notre Dame have not won a national championship this past decade, let alone this century. Notre Dame's made the playoff a few times under Brian Kelly in 2020 and 2018, and they played for the national championship back when the BCS was a thing in 2012. In all of those years, they had undefeated regular seasons, all of them. Notre Dame lost in 2020, but in the ACC championship game in kind of what was a very weird year. Penn State, meanwhile, has never been here before. This is their first ever participation in any type of national championship system, whether that be a playoff or BCS, ever in the 21st century. First ever. So, very big game for both programs. It cannot be overstated that a win here would not, of course, mean as much as a national championship, but Notre Dame just earned their first major postseason win this year against Indiana the first time around in the quarterfinal against Georgia in the Sugar Bowl. Here would just be another feather in the cap for Marcus Freeman. Penn State has won major New Year's Six Bowls before, several in the 21st century, but they've never again played for a national championship in the 21st century. So a win here, putting them within striking distance, one more game to win it all, that is just, it's perfect if you're a Penn State fan. And I also think both of these fan bases deserve national championships. They have been so patient. They have waited so long. Let's talk about this matchup here. And before we do, I want to encourage you all, if you haven't already, like the video, give it a thumbs up to help us get into the algorithm, and also share this video around to help us expand our base at College Football with Sam. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and also click the notification bell. That way you'll get notified when I release new content or when I go live throughout the week, scheduled Mondays and Wednesdays at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. And there will be a plethora more videos on this matchup. And also the Cotton Bowl matchup between Ohio State and Texas. So you'll want to hit the notification bell so that you can get notified when those videos drop. Do those things and also comment your thoughts down below. That way you enter my giveaway. The winners of said giveaway will be announced at halftime of both of the semifinal matchups. 2 for the Orange Bowl, 2 for the Cotton Bowl. And if you want to support the channel in any other way and also join our Discord server, the links to those are in the pinned comment and the video description. But let's get on with this, shall we? And I want to talk about a few critical matchups, and then we'll dive into breaking down the rosters. We like to start from a broad sense and then slowly narrow ourselves, get a little deeper into the mud and the weeds before we release our prediction. So I think the first critical matchup here, we have a second one, is Penn State's, I would say, passing offense against Notre Dame's pass rush. Notre Dame's secondary is very good. It's quite good. They have an alien player who you may know of by the name of Xavier Watts at safety. However, what I will say is that look through the entirety of their season. Which competent passing offense have they played? My mind only goes to Indiana. And I think Indiana was just so overwhelmed in terms of talent, and Curtis Rourke was so inaccurate, and his receivers, both tight ends and wide receivers, weren't good enough to quite get away from a very talented, well-coached, disciplined Notre Dame defense, specifically secondary. And Curtis Rourke was constantly getting pressured. Georgia's passing offense, not exactly competent, especially without Carson Beck. USC's Jade Mayava was a turnover machine, and was about the same level of quarterback that Miller Moss was. And then we all know about Texas A&M, or the service academies that Notre Dame has played. This is not being disrespectful to Notre Dame's defense, who I think is one of the best in the country. The point is, Penn State is the first player who has an alien player in the passing offense that Notre Dame has played ever. His name's Tyler Warren. And Harrison Wallace III and Amari Evans have shown capability to affect you deep or intermediate or short. Those are receivers that when they are on, they are on. And it's the same for quarterback Drew Allar, who is the most NFL-ready quarterback that Notre Dame has played all season long. I mean, Penn State's offense is going to be going up against an elite defense here. We know that. Drake Bowen, Jack Kaiser, Xavier Watts, and they have many other players in that secondary, and Penn State has many players in that wide receiver core, tight end room, and even their running backs who can, make things happen in the backfield and also through the air as receivers. But I think this matchup is fascinating because can Notre Dame get pressure with their blitzes? They're one of the most, if not the most, blitz-heavy teams in the country. And what's the chess match between Al Golden, Notre Dame's defensive coordinator, and Andy Kotelnicki, Penn State's offensive coordinator, look like? Because again, Notre Dame's defense is riddled with NFL players. You got Howard Cross III up front. You have Jaylen Sneed, Drake Bowen, Jack Kaiser, a veteran linebacker room. You have Xavier Watts at safety. And they have some young players in that secondary who've really stepped up as well this season with the injury to Benjamin Morrison, their number one corner. But this is perhaps the most NFL offense that Notre Dame has played all season long, with some great guards, offensive linemen like Olivea Ione and Nick Dawkins for Penn State. You got Tyler Warren, obviously, at tight end. Singleton's been an X factor, I think, in the receiving game for Penn State. And, of course, you have Drew Allar at quarterback for the Nittany Lions. The other critical matchup is Notre Dame's rushing offense against Penn State's rushing defense. Now, much like the prior matchup, there are some health concerns involved. Like I mentioned, Howard Cross III and Xavier Watts. They got banged up a little bit during the Sugar Bowl. I'd expect them to be back for the Orange Bowl, but I don't know if they will or won't be. It's the same with Penn State's Abdul Carter. He got banged up during the Fiesta Bowl and couldn't play after he came out due to his injury to, I forget what arm it was. But Penn State is, well, I think they're well conditioned. I think they're well coached. They have a next man up mentality. It's the same thing with Notre Dame. These teams are very similar in the fact that I think they have elite strength and conditioning. The point being, it sounds like Abdul Carter's going to be back. And for these two teams, unless there is a serious season-ending injury, their players will try and play, which I think speaks to the culture of both of these programs as well. But it's Penn State's rushing defense, and can they limit this Notre Dame rushing offense that is just absolutely lethal? Riley Leonard, Jeremiah Love, Jadarian Price, and then up front you have Billy Scruth, you have Pat Coogan, you have Anthony Knapp, you have Rocco Spindler, you have a lot of great players on that Notre Dame offensive line. And then for Penn State, Abdul Carter, Zane Durant, Dennis-Sutton, Dvon J. Thomas. That's their starting front four on the defensive line. They're close to leading the Big Ten, if not leading the Big Ten in TFLs. They're TFL machines, the Penn State defenses, especially their front. And pay attention to Kobe King and also Jaylen Reed at linebacker and safety, respectively. Moving on now, I want to specifically go through these offenses and, of course, break them down for you all. So no better place to start than the stat sheet here. Notre Dame is averaging 37.7 points per game. Penn State's averaging 33.7 points per game. You look at points per play, Notre Dame's averaging 0.587 points per play, which is second. Penn State's averaging 0.503 points per play, which is 11th. Penn State scores 4.1 offensive touchdowns per game. Notre Dame scores 4.5, which is 21st and 4th, respectively. Then you look at total offense, and this is the funny thing. This is the really interesting thing with Notre Dame. Scoring offense, scoring defense among the nation's best, sometimes by a mile, with the exception of Ohio State. Then you look at total defense and total offense, and unlike Ohio State, who's very dominant still in some of those areas, Notre Dame kind of dips a little bit. They're only 43rd in yards per game with 406.8. Penn State is 19th, gaining 436.3 per game. Penn State averages 6.5 yards per play, which is 8th. Notre Dame only averages 6.3. So, while points matter more than yards, of course they do, that's a no-duh, it's something that's very interesting. And I think what helps explain that is Notre Dame's offensive point share, the share of their points scored exclusively by their offense, is 124th, 90.7%, because they'll score touchdowns on special teams, and they'll also get pick sixes from their defense or fumble recoveries for 6. Penn State, their offensive point share percentage is 94.5%. Several more percentage points better, but they're not on the end of the bell curve quite there. So they sit at 92nd, only a few placements higher or better, whatever you want to call it, despite being several percentage points higher. You look at rushing offense. Penn State averages 5.3 yards per carry. Notre Dame averages 6.1. Both are above 200 rushing yards per game. In terms of passing offense, Penn State is 12th in yards per pass attempt, averaging 8.5, 43rd in yards per completion, averaging 12.5. Notre Dame averages 6.9 and 10.5 respectively. They're outside the top 75 in yards per pass attempt and yards per completion. To put it simply, I think that Penn State is better at quarterback. I think Allar is better than Leonard. I think that Allar has an underrated scrambling ability about him that can be utilized in this game. I think he's a much better passer than Riley Leonard as well. But Leonard is a much better rusher, more natural of a runner than Allar is, and he hasn't made as many turnover-worthy plays as Allar has, though I think in part that's because Penn State's offense doesn't rely on Drew Allar a ton, but they rely on him almost infinitely more than Notre Dame relies on Leonard in terms of throwing the football. I think Penn State has the better wide receivers. I think that they have the better tight end. That point's a no-dub because Penn State has Tyler Warren, who has over 1,300 total yards of offense, and I think, if my memory serves me correctly, 13 total touchdowns. Running back is a push. I think Jeremiah Love is the best individual back of the group, but he's not 100%. Meanwhile, Nicholas Singleton, after being injured in the middle of the year, he's approached 100%. Kaytron Allen's 100% and has recently been, I think, grinding the gears in a good way. And then you also got to factor in Jadarian Price for Notre Dame. Penn State leads the Big Ten, by the way, in yards per carry. Notre Dame leads the Power 4. So these are some of the best rushing offenses. In fact, I'll go as far to say maybe the 2 best rushing offenses in all of college football will be facing off in the Orange Bowl here. I think that center and guard is also a push. They can go either way. If I had to go one way, I would go Notre Dame at center and running back and Penn State at the guard position. I think Notre Dame, though, straight up is better at tackle. I am more impressed with Notre Dame's pass protection just on film and what I see on the stat sheet than I am with Penn State. Notre Dame actually has a inferior QB sacked percentage compared to Penn State, 4.74% compared to Penn State's 4.39%. But again, I think part of that is the fact that when I watch these two offenses here, I think that Penn State's, they have the better receivers, they have the better tight ends. I think Allar's also very good at when the pocket implodes, he scrambles out, while Riley Leonard, I think, is more of a designed runner, although he's better at avoiding sacks than Allar. Just from what I watch, I believe that Notre Dame is better at tackle, not just in pass protection, but also in run blocking as well. They're the best off-tackle rushing team in the entire country. Looking at these defenses here, Penn State is better on the D-line, better at linebacker. Notre Dame is better in the secondary. Let's check out these defenses right here. In terms of scoring defense, Notre Dame only allows 13.6 points per game. Penn State allows 15.8. Notre Dame allows 0.201 points per play from their opponents, which is second. Penn State allows 0.243 opponent points per play, which is fifth. Opponent offensive touchdowns per game. Notre Dame allows 1.6, which is third. Penn State allows 1.7, which is fourth. In terms of total defense, Penn State only allows 4.4 opponent yards per play, which is sixth. Notre Dame also 4.4 opponent yards per play, but they're fifth, I assume, because when you when you just add in more placements behind the decimal, Notre Dame allows a slightly lower average. Penn State is superior in total defense, though, in terms of opponent yards per game, only allowing 288.9 compared to Notre Dame's 295.4. When you look at rushing defense, Notre Dame allows 127.9 opponent yards per game and 3.6 opponent yards per carry. Penn State allows 3.1 opponent yards per carry and 101.0 opponent rushing yards per game, which is eighth. Passing defense is where this really gets fascinating. I want to circle a few things. Number one, their sack percentages are both top 25, but not top 20, so they basically get the same amount of pressure, not factoring in again for their types of opponents, but on their opponent's average drop back, they basically get the same amount of pressure. When you look at opponent yards per pass attempt, Notre Dame only allows a 5.8 average there from their opponent in terms of yards per pass attempt. Penn State allows 6.3. When you look at yards per completion, though, Notre Dame allows opponents to average 11.4 yards per pass attempt. Penn State allows opponents to average 10.7 yards per pass attempt. So Notre Dame's passing defense is elite in large part because they force incompletions. But if you can complete consistently on them, and I think Gunnar Stockton showed a little bit of this in the Sugar Bowl, you can move that passing defense. I don't think it's quite as good as, let's say, Ohio State's, where they both force you to throw incompletions or at least to throw some short completions, but they rarely, if ever, allow consistent big plays or consistent intermediate plays down the field. And when they do, it's because they're facing a passing offense that's on here. So those are a few things to keep in mind. I still think even though Notre Dame's passing defense is a little bit suspect in some areas, a little bit boom or bust, and the numbers would bear that out, that they're still better at safety, they're better at corner than Penn State. Penn State's just better at linebacker, I think mainly because of Kobe King and the X-Factor player he is, and they're deep there as well. At D-line, the injury to Riley Mills really hurts Notre Dame. And something that I noticed is that Georgia, I don't think much of a surprise because their O-line is really physical, was able to really push around that defensive line and linebacker core at times. It was pretty inconsistent, and ultimately because Notre Dame has a great front, good safety room, and Georgia's running backs are a little bit suspect, it didn't result in Georgia gashing them on the ground, but it is something to keep in mind that I think Georgia in that game did have a trench advantage. I think Penn State has a trench advantage over Notre Dame if you're comparing both of the defensive lines, which of course is not how college football is played, but in the trenches on defense, I would favor Penn State. I would overall favor them in the trenches. I would favor Notre Dame's special teams unit. They impressed me against Georgia, returning that kickoff for a touchdown. I think that their kicking game has been evolving, has improved as the year has gone on and on and on. Spencer Schrader, I think, has been very effective. When you look at Ryan Barker for Penn State, he's been effective too at kicker, but not to the same degree. And I also think Riley Thompson still has some issues as punter for the Nittany Lions. The blue chip ratio says Notre Dame is the better roster. When I look at these teams, though, and factor in balance, the explosivity, the teams they've played and matched up with and how they fared, I do think Penn State has the better roster here. And a huge part of this has to do with just, I would say, really three players. Abdul Carter, Tyler Warren, Drew Allar. And then the fact that Penn State is pretty close in a lot of other positions to Notre Dame on top of that. I think they're significantly better at tight end. I'd say they're more talented at QB. Though Leonard has been, Leonard's a very effective leader. Leonard is a athlete, not just a leader, not just a good decision maker. He's an athlete. He put that offense on his back against Georgia when nothing else was working, and Notre Dame figured, well, let's run the quarterback. And then once they did that, Leonard took some hits. I imagine he's sore after that game, but he really was the MVP of that game. People were making fun of him for earning that. You did not watch the game if you were making fun of Riley Leonard winning that MVP award. He carried Notre Dame to victory there, along with Marcus Freeman's elite coaching. So good for the Irish in that matchup. But I would take Penn State's roster. I think it's one of the best rosters in the country. Comparing these teams from FPI and S&P Plus's viewpoint, two of the more accurate power ratings nationally, Penn State is 21.3 points better than the average team per FPI. For Notre Dame, that's 25.7. According to S&P Plus, Penn State is 25.8 points better than the average college football team. Notre Dame is 25.5 points better than the average football team. Points per play margin for Penn State is a 0.260, which means for every play that Penn State runs compared to every play their opponent runs, they score 0.26 more points, which is a little over a fourth more point on a play-per-play basis. So on an average basis, they game control their opponents, dominate them, beat them fairly. Their EPA margin's a 0.204. For Notre Dame, 0.386 points per play margin, and EPA margin is 0.229. I think a huge part of this is Notre Dame is very good at forcing turnovers. I mean, that explains all of this. You get short fields, you get the pick sixes, the special teams has been peaking, and not only that, Mike Denbrock, Al Golden, Marcus Freeman, they're all top 10 in what they do. I think that Denbrock is top 3 as an offensive coordinator. Golden's definitely top 10, if not top 5. That right there is a top 5 head coach and coordinator trio. Marcus Freeman, Al Golden, and Mike Denbrock. Speaking of the turnovers, though, I wanted to get to that. Notre Dame has a plus 1.3 turnover margin per game, second, and they have 2.2 takeaways per game, which is fifth. Penn State's top 40 in both of those statistics, so Penn State still wins the turnover battle. They force some turnovers, not to the same degree that Notre Dame does, and Notre Dame is more efficient on a play-per-play basis than Penn State is. Penn State's played the 17th best strength of schedule. They're ranked 6th in ESPN's efficiency metrics, 9th in game control. Notre Dame's played the 31st toughest strength of schedule, 2nd in efficiency, 3rd overall in game control. These are two teams who are at minimum in the top 10, and I'd go further than that. I think Penn State is a team that has struggled to gel together in certain areas, whether it's due to roster limitations, whether it's due to James Franklin, or the fact that they have new coordinators, a new OC, a new DC, and a head coach who's very coordinator dependent, might I add. So I feel like Penn State is a little bit underrated still in the game control and efficiency and a lot of these other metrics. I think that they have a ceiling to them that they haven't quite hit yet. For Notre Dame, meanwhile, 2nd in efficiency, 3rd in game control. I don't think they're overrated or underrated here. I think they are one of the best teams in college football. They remind me the most out of all of these teams of my own Michigan Wolverines, if I'm being honest. Specifically, they remind me, I would say, of the 2021 or 2022 Michigan Wolverines. Not quite the 23 Wolverines. If there are teams that remind me of that team more, I would say those are Texas and Penn State. And Ohio State is just, they're elite, but they're elite in like a different build than those Michigan teams that I'm talking about. On defense, pretty similar with how elite they are. Offensively, they've went about it in almost an entirely different way, but they're still successful there because Day's an offensive genius. I think that Notre Dame, for all that I mentioned and how I talked about how I think Penn State has the roster edge, I do think Notre Dame has a coaching advantage here. I think that Marcus Freeman, after what he did in the Sugar Bowl, is definitely a top 10 head coach. I don't quite think Franklin is there, especially if we're talking about game management. Freeman's teams are creative on special teams. They rely on analytics, but not as like some type of religious code. They just observe analytics, which every staff should do, and they're very adaptable, and they find ways to win. Penn State staff, I think, is pretty creative, and I think that Kotelnicki and Allen, specifically Kotelnicki, are some of the better coordinators in the country, but Allen is not quite as good as Golden. not quite. So if I had to decide where the defensive staff would go, I would go for coordinator, Notre Dame, assistant coaches, probably Penn State. Assistant coaches for both of these offenses would probably still be a push. For coordinator, would also probably be a little bit of a push too. I think these offensive staffs are pretty close. The real separator, I think, is head coach in favor of Freeman over Franklin. Overall, I'm picking Penn State to win, and I'm picking them to cover. And my confidence in this pick is about a 3 out of 10. Notre Dame, by the way, is favored by 2 points, according to Vegas out there. So I think Penn State covers, and I think they win 24-20. I think Penn State will be able to run the football pretty effectively against this Notre Dame front, who is a little bit banged up, and also add that in with Penn State being probably the most dynamic in terms of ceiling passing offense that Notre Dame has played all season long. I think that right there is the difference. Of course, I'm still yet to do my deep dive on this matchup where I'm going to watch film, look at the analytics more deeply and different matchups, of course. So maybe I'll change my mind. But I'm going with Penn State to win here. I think that, James Franklin has lost so many big games in a row that at some point he is going to, wake up and win one. That's not my logic for picking this game, though. It's the fact that while Notre Dame does have some matchup advantages on Penn State, I think Penn State's better at stopping the run than Notre Dame is, and more so than Notre Dame is better at running the football than Penn State is. I think there's a wider disparity in the trenches, and more specifically than just the trenches, the rushing offenses and defenses on average in favor of the Nittany Lions. And I think on top of that, when you factor in that Drew Allar is the more efficient passing QB, and he has better weapons in the passing game than Notre Dame does, I think that makes the difference here for a score of 24-20 in favor of Penn State. So James Franklin and Penn State, I think they'll move on to the national championship game, play the winner of the Cotton Bowl. When you look at Notre Dame, I think if they lose this game, the season's still a success. If they win this game, they very well can win a national championship. So go Nittany Lions and go Fighting Irish. I'm hoping that this Orange Bowl is an all-time classic. Thank you so much for watching. Remember to like the video and subscribe to the channel, and also hit that notification bell so that way you can get notified when new content from College Football with Sam drops. I appreciate you very much, and also share the video around to others who enjoy the sport of college football and love it as I do and as you do, and comment your thoughts down below so that we can have a conversation, because I want to know what you are thinking. And join our Discord server where we talk college football 24/7 via the link in the description or down below in the pinned comment. Thank you to my Heisman Patreon members, Crash2488, Brasco Rascal, and Conlo OH. Thank you to my All-American Patreon members, Chris Lane, Ismar, and Tyler Nye. And thank you to my All-Conference members, John Lynn, Roaming Gnome, Matthew Sale, Austin Christmas, Joshua Jorgensen, and Will Loftus. Make sure to check out my merchandise store and or Patreon page, or super chat down in the comment section below to support the channel. The Patreon page and merchandise store links are in the description or down below in the pinned comment. I hope you have a wonderful day. It is December, so Merry Christmas and also Happy New Year. I will see you guys soon.